do the impossible here, but they were waiting in front of their obstacle and their challenge for 3 days. They were sitting there, waiting, looking at their greatest obstacle in the face. We learn further down in verse 15 that the Jordan River was at flood stage, a 1 mile wide raging torrent moving about 10 miles per hour, probably filled with tangled brush and floating debris. They don't see a bridge or a cruise ship or jet skis for that matter, or even a pontoon boat. They're sitting there waiting. God told them to cross the Jordan, but the Jordan River is at flood stage and it's moving fast. How are they going to get across? They waited for 3 days at the bank of the Jordan River. Can you imagine what's going through their minds? Impatient, sitting there waiting, looking at their greatest challenge and obstacle in the face. Their minds probably were filled with doubts and discouragement, say that, and probably they're just are saying, "How is this going to happen?" Do you get patient when you have to wait a while, walking in difficult and uncertain times? How about when your marriage is crumbling all around you and you don't like to wait, so you try to manipulate and fix things, but then you realize that you have no control over the situation? And other than counseling and prayer, you have no control and you realize that God is in control. And all you can do is wait and wait and pray for your spouse. How about when your children have run away from God and you begin to think it's impossible for them to return to God? So all you've been doing is waiting and praying, waiting and praying. How about when you're waiting for a job to open up and there's nothing happening and the bills are piling up and you don't even get an interview and you're waiting and praying and waiting and praying? How about when you're waiting for a good report from the doctor, but they give you no answers, just more testing? You see, it's during these waiting periods that God works in us and through us. The waiting period builds perseverance and endurance. You see, it's important for us to not. I can't overcook it. It's foolproof.
You made this? It was real good.
Today's protagonist helps wage war against the US government in defense of his people's lands. And if it's war you're looking to wage, then I've got good news for you, because today's video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free online strategy game that pits millions of players against each other worldwide. In Conflict of Nations, you fight up to 64 other players in real-time games that can take weeks to complete. The game is set in the early 21st century and features modern-day weapons and technology. Your objective is to take over the world, to find your own strategy, build powerful armies by combining dozens of different types of infantry, tanks, and planes, and fight for world domination in a challenging PvP environment. If real-time Modern Warfare sounds, everything is fully optimized for cross-platform gaming, played with the same accounts on both PC and mobile. So if this sounds like your kind of game, click the link in the description below to jump into a game of Conflict of Nations. And as a special bonus, you guys will receive a special gift when you sign up using my link. You can snag 13,000 gold a month of premium subscription for free. So click the link in the description below, choose the country, and fight your way to victory in epic real-time battles. See you on the battlefield. To Dakota, Sitting Bull was their greatest leader, the one who tried to guide and protect them during a time of great and violent turmoil. So the American government Sitting Bull started off simply as an annoying obstacle, but became much more than that after handing them their humiliating defeat at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Afterward, he turned into a dangerous spark, one which they feared could ignite the powder keg right when they were almost finished subjugating the Native American tribes. To himself, Sitting Bull was a man looking to preserve the past, completely defiant when it came to his refusal to abandon the old ways of his people, even if this meant war and even death. Right off the bat, we had a bit of controversy regarding Sitting Bull's birthplaces. There's some disagreement between the official version and the information passed down through oral tradition. According to the history books, Sitting Bull was born circa 1831 in modern-day South Dakota on the bank of the Grand River. However, some of his descendants assert that the tribal leader was actually born in Montana, near modern-day Mars City, on the bank of the Yellowstone River. Sitting Bull was part of the Hunkpapa Lakota tribe, themselves a subdivision of the Sioux people. His name in the Lakota language was Tatanka Liatake, which literally translates as Buffalo Bull who sits down. But that was not the name that he had as a child. When he was born, he was given the name Jumping Badger and later acquired the nickname Slow for his restrained and calculated demeanor. His father and his uncles were all tribal chiefs, so there was a lot of pressure for Jumping Badger to follow in their footsteps. Fortunately, the young Lakota seemed determined to cast off the moniker Slow, which he wasn't too fond of, and display the four virtues which were considered fundamental to the Lakota: bravery, wisdom, fortitude, and generosity. From an early age, he took part in many games and competitions that tested his skills, and he showed his mettle when he took down his first buffalo when he was only 10 years old. When he turned 14 years of age, Jumping Badger was given his first opportunity to count coup. This meant striking an enemy up close and was the most common way of gaining war honors among the Native American tribes of the Great Plains. It could have been done with the hand, a weapon, or a whip, but it was most commonly done with a coup stick, a long, peeled wand with a feather on the end. The challenge was getting close enough to the enemy to touch him and then escape without getting injured or killed. It was generally seen as more honorable than killing or scalping the enemy, but at the same time, it was a great humiliation for the target, so most native warriors would have gone to great lengths to avoid being the ones that someone else counted coup on. Anyway, when he was 14, Jumping Badger was presented with a coup stick and joined a Dakota War party on a raid against the Crow, who were their greatest enemy at the time. During the fight, the young man was successful in counting coup against a Crow warrior. This filled his father with pride, and when they returned home, the tribe had a ceremony to honor the young warrior and mark his passage into adulthood. He also received a new name that was more worthy of him, and Jumping Badger became Sitting Bull. At 14, Sitting Bull was already regarded as a warrior, and he continued his meteoric rise through the ranks of the Lakota tribe. He was a member of several groups, most notably of the Strong Heart Society, which was made up of the bravest and most elite warriors. He was then given the prestigious title of Sash Wearer and became the leader of the group in 1856. Sitting Bull proved himself to be a natural leader, and it was only fitting that he became one of the people who shaped their tribe's relationships with the outside world, particularly after his father was killed in a fight with a Crow warrior. At first, he was indifferent to the US government and white settlers. He said, "I have seen nothing that the white man has which is as good as our right to roam and to live on the open plains as we choose." That being said, he wasn't hostile either. Growing up, most of the interactions with white people that he experienced were positive, since most of them involved fur traders who were eager to stay on friendly terms with the Lakota. But as settlers and prospectors kept expanding westward, animosity developed on both sides that inevitably turned violent. This resulted in the Dakota War of 1862, also known by many other names such as the Sioux Uprising or Little Crow's War. The conflict started in Minnesota, which had only become a state a few years earlier. To help colonize the territory, the US government passed the Homestead Act in 1862, which promised 160 acres of land to any person or family who claimed that land and then lived and cultivated it for 5 years. Most of that territory originally belonged to Native American groups such as the Dakota and Ojibwe people. On paper, the American government obtained all the land fair and square by either buying it directly or setting up reservations where the native tribes were supposed to receive regular payments and supply shipments. But the government regularly broke the treaties, which were heavily in their favor to begin with. Payments were missed, supplies were late, and contracts were renegotiated to get more and more concessions. By 1858, the Dakota people from Minnesota lived on a small strip of land, and many of them were starving due to the lack of food shipments and their inability to hunt. Frustration turned to anger, which turned to violence. In 1862, a faction of Dakota warriors led by Chief Little Crow began raiding settlements and stores, launching a 6-week-long war that saw the deaths of over 350 settlers. The Civil War slowed down the government response, but the Dakota eventually fought an army consisting mainly of volunteers. They were decisively defeated at the Battle of Wood Lake, and Little Crow was later killed during a raiding party. Afterwards, dozens of Dakota warriors were hanged for their role in the war, and the government voided all treaties with the Dakota people, forcing them to leave Minnesota altogether.
Looking to equip yourself for career growth? Learn to lead in IT. The UNC Greensboro Bryan School of Business and Economics has a program tailored for you. Our MS in IT and management is affordable, flexible, and designed to develop the IT leaders of the future. At UNCG, you're in the driver's seat. Study online or on campus. Pursue your master's or earn stackable certificates in business analytics, cybersecurity, and supply chain management. Visit our site to request more information.
All right, up we go. It's your morning go time, so why not turn to the team you trust? Devontae and Audrey have what's new, what's now, and what's up next. Brian's upcoming forecast will help you plan your next 12 hours. And before your wheels up and out the door, Christina will size up your commute, so you can get up and get back to your familiar rhythm. We are WXII 12 News Mornings, and we're up with you. Available on YouTube TV, Hulu, and on our app.
Sitting Bull had no role in this war, but his people and many other tribes suffered the consequences all the same as the government decided to punish all the Sioux by sending military expeditions into their territory to push them back even further. It was in June 1863 that Sitting Bull first fought the United States Army, but this was just a minor skirmish. A real fight occurred a year later, on July the 28th, 1864, at the Battle of Kildare Mountain. This conflict involved around 4,000 soldiers in total, which may have been the largest single battle between the US Army and the Plains tribes, larger than the more famous Battle of Little Bighorn that we'll cover in a bit. On one side, there were two brigades led by Brigadier General Alfred Sully, around 2,200 soldiers. Their mission, usually referred to as Sully's expedition, was to weaken the Sioux however possible and get them to relocate further west. Best way to do this was to destroy their villages. They had already done it once back at Whitestone Hill back in September 1863, and now they had their sights set on a new target, an even larger Sioux encampment near the Little Missouri River in present-day Dunn County, North Dakota. On the other side were around 1,600 warriors, most of them belonging to various Lakota tribes. Sitting Bull was there as the leader of the Hunkpapa, alongside another famed warrior named Gall. Sully was expecting an enemy force double, even triple what he actually encountered, but he had superior firepower, which also included 2 cannons. The fight was fairly one-sided. The Lakota tried a few times to charge into the ranks of the army soldiers, but their guns kept the warriors at bay until they finally reached within cannon range. Once that happened, the battle was pretty much over. Sully battered the village with cannon fire until the inhabitants had no choice but to abandon it. The following day, his men marched into the settlement and destroyed everything, including food and supplies, so that the Lakota would have no reason to return. For many warriors, like Sitting Bull, it was the first time that they encountered artillery in battle and were finally realizing the strength that they were up against. Even so, they did not retreat completely and instead kept harassing Sully's troops with small raids as the army made its way through the rugged hills and the steep ravines west of Kildare Mountain. This eventually culminated in the Battle of the Badlands, almost 2 weeks after their first conflict. Once again, superior firepower won the day, and Sully ended his military campaign once the Lakota had been driven into Montana. During this time, Sitting Bull was hardly the only Lakota leader who fought the United States Army. In 1866, another violent conflict emerged known as Red Cloud's War, which was led by Chief Red Cloud, leader of the Oglala Lakota people. For 2 years, he fought the US Army for control of the Powder River Country region in Wyoming. Strictly speaking, when a treaty had been signed, that land belonged to the Crow people. However, the Oglala fought them over it the same way that they had done for centuries, and they won, so they considered the territory rightfully theirs. Then the US government tried taking advantage of the situation to drive them away, since that was an important piece of land. Well, their territory contained part of the Bozeman Trail, which at that time was the shortest route that took settlers and prospectors from the Oregon Trail in Wyoming to the Gold Rush region of Montana. It was a route that the government desperately wanted to control, so they tried building several new forts to gain a foothold in the area. What made this conflict notable was that it ended in a victory for the Lakota. For most of the war, Red Cloud and his allies, which included Sitting Bull, resorted to raids and other blitz attacks. That being said, there were a few large-scale battles, such as the Fetterman Fight, which ended in decisive victories for the Lakota. Eventually, the US government sought peace and signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. The military agreed to abandon the forts and retreat from the area. More importantly, the treaty established the Great Sioux Reservation, a large swath of land that was reserved for Native people. It also recognized the Black Hills in the Dakota Territory as being unceded territory that was sacred to the Lakota as their place of origin, and granted them exclusive use of it. Around 130 tribal leaders signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie, but Sitting Bull was not one of them. He didn't do it because he didn't want to move his people or change their way of life, but his actions proved somewhat pathetic because it took the United States government less than a decade to break the treaty once they discovered that there was gold in those hills. Throughout the late 1860s and early 1870s, Sitting Bull continued to carry out minor skirmishes against various parties that entered Lakota territory, most notable of all being a group working for the Northern Pacific Railway who wanted to lay down track over land which Sitting Bull considered to belong to the Hunkpapa. Some sources claim that during this time Sitting Bull became the supreme chief of Sioux Nation, but others strongly contend that no such position existed. At most, Sitting Bull came to be regarded as the unofficial leader of the non-treaty Lakota, meaning all the Native Americans who refused to sign and adhere to the Treaty of Fort Laramie and lived outside the Great Sioux Reservation. In 1874, the United States government dispatched the 7th Cavalry to the Black Hills inside the Dakota Territory. Their mission was to scout for a suitable location for a new fort, but also to search the area for natural resources. Specifically, they were to investigate a rumor that there might be gold in the Black Hills. This was a time when America was firmly gripped with gold fever. The California gold rush had a massive effect on the country's economy and its migration toward the west, so the possibility of a similar scenario in Dakota was just too good to ignore. Therefore, on July the 2nd, 1874, 1,000 soldiers and 110 wagons set off on the Black Hills expedition, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The California gold rush also had a devastating effect on the Native American population, and in August 1874, the worst thing possible for them happened. Custer found gold in the Black Hills. He described it as an extensive area rich in gold deposits, and in just a week, the New York Tribune proclaimed the Black Hills to be new gold country. Nowhere in Custer's report or the newspapers was it mentioned that the land with the gold was legally the Lakotas. By autumn, over 15,000 miners had already made their way to the Dakota Territory. At first, the army was there to arrest and evacuate the prospectors who snuck into Lakota lands, although it was mainly saving them from being killed by the Native Americans. The government made an offer of $6 million to purchase the Black Hills, an offer which was firmly rejected by Sitting Bull. At that point, President Ulysses S. Grant pretty much said, screw the treaty, and pulled the army from the region, allowing people to travel unimpeded to the Black Hills. In December 1875, Grant gave a deadline of January 31st, 1876, by which point all the Sioux people had to relocate inside the Great Sioux Reservation. Those who failed to do so would be considered and treated as hostiles. Even if Sitting Bull would have been willing to move, which he wasn't, it would have been almost impossible to do it in such a short time and during the middle of winter. Therefore, he saw no other choice. The deadline passed, and the Great Sioux War began. Word of Sitting Bull's refusal to accept any kind of deal with the American government reached other tribes that were living outside the Great Sioux Reservation. The first half of 1876 saw many of them make their way to Sitting Bull's camp, which soon turned into a village with around 10,000 people on the bank of the Little Bighorn River. These were mainly Lakota and Dakota Sioux, but also some Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho. The exact number of warriors remains disputed to this day, but it's generally estimated to be around 2,000. Besides Sitting Bull, other prominent leaders included Gall and the famed warrior Crazy Horse. The opening skirmish of the conflict, which was also known as the Black Hills War, occurred in May 1876 when 6 cavalry troops led by Colonel Joseph J. Reynolds attacked a Native American village in Montana's Powder River Valley. Reynolds split his army into 4 groups, but due to a miscalculation from the colonel, only one reached the village in time. Although they managed to destroy the village, they also sustained casualties and ultimately were forced to retreat. For his actions, Reynolds was later charged with dereliction of duty and court-martial. Another notable fight was the Battle of Rosebud on June 17th, named after Montana's Rosebud Creek. This was a bigger affair that included around 1,000 soldiers on each side, but like the first one, Sitting Bull was not involved. Rather, this one saw